Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on our Research Spotlight, the Art and Science of Assessments. Today we have with us Molly Lombardi, who is our VP and Principal Analyst of the Workforce Management Practice here at Brandon Hall Group, and Ben Eubanks, who is our HCM Analyst here at Brandon Hall Group. A little bit about Brandon Hall Group. We were founded in 1992. We're the leading HCM analyst firm, and we have over 200,000 subscribers, and we focus on research-based insights. We cover the full spectrum of HCM, including learning and development, talent management, leadership development, talent acquisition, HR, and workforce management. And for today's webinar, we do encourage you to ask questions. Go ahead and make comments. We have the GoToMeeting, or GoToWebinar, I should say, toolbar. You can use the chat box or the question box, and both of our presenters will be able to see it. We'll have a discussion throughout, and towards the end, we'll have a Q&A. Now, the presentation will be recorded, and the slides and video will be sent to all attendees within 48 hours of the webinar. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email us at success@brandonhall.com. And with that, I will hand it over to Molly, who will take us through the agenda.
Great. Thank you so much, Melissa. Happy to be here with you today and with Ben. I know Ben was having a little bit of connection difficulty, so he'll chime in when he gets reconnected, but we're really happy to be here with you today. I'm happy to be here with you today because I love talking about assessments, so I'm really excited to share with you our latest research on the topic. We're going to go through a couple of things here on the agenda. It looks like a pretty packed agenda, and it is, but I promise we'll get you out on time. But we're going to start with talking about the business context, why assessments are so important now for organizations. We're going to talk a little bit about defining the terms. There's a lot of different assessment types available to organizations that really are used in very different ways and should be used at different decision points in the talent life cycle. So we're going to talk about that and sort of understanding the difference between some of the different assessment types. We're going to talk about what's in it for me. That's really the need we're seeing for a lot of organizations for the importance of feedback to the assessment taker, whether it's pre or post hire, and really helping individuals understand what's in it for them when it comes to assessments, not just viewing assessments as important from an organizational standpoint, but for the individuals as well. We'll talk a little bit about integration and how organizations are making assessments part of their talent language. And then we're going to end with a look at 3 questions that can help enable you to have the right conversation with your assessment providers. And then Ben hopefully will do a little bit of wrap up on our Member Center and the Q&A as well. So with that, let's jump into it. One of the reasons I think assessments are so important now is we're really operating in what I'm calling the era of context. We no longer make decisions in a vacuum. It's so easy and because it's become so commonplace to gather more information. We're used to making decisions in the context of information and looking at one restaurant compared to another, for example, or one hotel or trip or product reviews. And so we're really used to looking at information in context of how it stacks up relative to other things. So I think this idea of context and data is really infiltrating our lives, in our personal lives and as consumers, and so it's also natural that it becomes a part of how we think about our work lives as well. We're making decisions in the context of information in new ways. We're also really in an era of data-driven decisions. And again, whether it's in our personal lives, we're getting so much more comfortable with this idea of things like wearable technology that are giving us biofeedback on our activity and our nutrition and our sleep. So everything from the most intimate details of who we are, we're gathering data all the time. And we talk about big data and small data and data of various sizes, but really this idea of data being all around us and getting more comfortable with using it, I think is really one of the reasons that assessments are becoming so popular and so important right now. Organizations are realizing they need to make better decisions. They need to really gain the most competitive advantage they can from their talent, and so they're looking to assessments to really help them make better data-driven decisions. And they're really looking to apply this comfort we're having with data in our personal lives to our work lives as well. And really, it comes down to the fact that all of these pieces are connected when it comes to our business and our talent strategy that leads us to business performance. So, when we look at this picture that I use a lot to talk about human capital management, it really is about how we translate our business strategy into our human capital management strategy and execute all of those elements of the human capital strategy to lead to business performance. And you can see here, talent acquisition, learning, succession, workforce planning, scheduling, time and attendance. They really are all interconnected, and one of the key ways they're interconnected is through competencies. Now, I know the word competencies can be a little scary to organizations. I know you lose half the room when you start to say the word competencies, but we really think of competencies as the language by which we talk about talent, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. But really, assessments are all about understanding what are those skills and capabilities, the knowledge and the sort of behaviors that individuals need to have to help guide our talent acquisition efforts, to guide our learning and development and succession efforts, to understand who to deploy when it comes to scheduling and what kind of staff we're going to need to build in the future for workforce planning, to understand what skills and capabilities were deployed through our time and attendance data. So really, again, organizations are looking at this as a holistic picture of how they execute for their business strategy, and assessments are really guiding organizations to think more strategically about their talent acquisition, development, and even deployment efforts. So I think all these reasons are behind why assessments are becoming so powerful for organizations today, and that more and more organizations are leveraging them. We've also seen a real evolution. I think for a long time assessments were sort of thought about as pre-hire testing. Do people have a particular skill? It was very sort of a hiring decision-making tool, and we're a lot more skill-based. And I think as the science has evolved, it's really become more of a pre and post-hire, and really looking at skills and capability and characteristics as well. So getting a more in-depth and well-rounded picture. And again, organizations realizing there's different assessment types that help them make different decisions. And again, then it's evolved from just this sort of individual activities around assessing at certain times to really an ongoing assessment strategy, understanding how assessments play a role throughout the talent life cycle. And now it's sort of into a technology-enabled assessment strategy that not only is the strategy there, but there's tools and technology to help integrate assessment data into the rest of the talent life cycle to be able to make assessment data available to individuals and organizations throughout the life cycle. So we're really seeing, again, it become deeply integrated in how organizations think about talent and helping them make decisions.
Hey Molly, I would ask you here, one of the things that I've kind of seen is this looks like, and like you mentioned, this is kind of globally as it's evolved over time, but this almost looks like within a company how they might kind of dip their toe in and then over time become more masterful at taking on assessments.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point, Ben, and welcome. I'm glad you were able to connect.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Yeah, we do see a lot of organizations follow this path. They may start with pre-hire assessments and move to post-hire, and then really make sure it's a part of their strategy and use technology. Although I will say, because of the tools available now, technology from the start is really helping organizations integrate assessments, and also we're seeing more and more organizations think about strategy first as well, and make sure they're understanding, what decisions or problems are they trying to solve with an assessment, because that really plays such a critical role in making that decision, making sure you're getting the right assessment to actually help you achieve the goal you're trying to achieve. And actually, that's a really good segue into the definitions that we used in this study. So, there's tons of different assessment types available out there, and these are some of the key categories that we looked at in the research. We looked at personality assessments that are really about individuals' preferences and traits that influence how they interact with others. So again, this can be important for both individuals and for teams to understand. It's really about those preferences and that are going to influence how you interact. So especially when you think about leadership and teaming, that can become really important. Of course, skill assessments that assess an individual's technical ability to perform the tasks of the job. Do they have the capability to do the job? Behavioral, which is how likely an individual is to behave in ways aligned with job success. So again, you may have things that, about your personality or about skills that may or may not align to the job, but the behavior is really about how those show up for an individual when it comes to being aligned with job success. Aptitude is around your current ability or suitability to learn the tasks of job. You may not already have the skills, but you may have the suitability to be able to learn those tasks. And then also we looked at cognitive assessments, looking at the thinking process related to the demands of the job. So again, you have some subtle but important differences when you think about these different assessment types and how organizations are using them to understand not only information about an individual, but really how that shows up in alignment to job performance. And I think that's really important to remember. It's not about making a decision about whether a person is good or bad. It's really about understanding how their skills and behaviors and attitude show up on the job and whether or not that's going to help align them to be successful in the role. So we looked at these types and tried to understand how organizations, or to what degree organizations are using them at various decision points. So the first one we looked at is the hiring process. And clearly you can see here your personality was the most commonly cited, closely followed by skill and behavioral assessments. So you can see, organizations are using a number of assessments, and they may not be using one exclusively. A lot of organizations are using multiple assessments in the hiring process, but the most commonly used ones are really those skill, personality, and behavioral. And then we also have two other categories here, simulations and assessment centers. So simulations, putting people in realistic job situations to help understand how again, some of these behaviors and skills show up in real jobs simulations, as well as assessment centers, which are where an individual may go and undergo sort of a battery of assessments in a number of different formats. So again, seeing how organizations are leveraging those in the hiring process. And we also looked at, oh, sorry, go ahead, Ben.
I was just going to say, one of the things that I've heard for a long time is how the more similar you can make the assessment to the actual job they're going to be doing, which is those last two there in the set, simulations and assessment centers, the more similar you can make the assessment, the better it's going to predict the actual hire. And it's interesting that those are the two least used when they could end up showing the best fit.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's also organizations who think about it holistically, who are really bought into the assessment process, may be more likely to use some of those tools. We're seeing a lot of organizations and solution providers starting to offer them in new ways, especially with now the technology to enable sort of virtual simulations. I think there's a lot of opportunity for organizations there as well. And I think it's an interesting point too, because simulations, even though they're not as popular as some of the other assessment, or in as wide use as some of the other assessment types, it's interesting when you look at post-hire, so this is assessment types used to target learning and development. Assessment centers are more likely to be used, and I think and this is for existing employees, and I think that makes sense because they can often be a bigger investment. But so investing in assessment centers to really understand and make sure you have the right people going into development programs and things like that. Some simulations, but I think it's interesting, post-hire organizations looking a little more to some of those assessment centers. But we see here as well sort of the skill, personality, and behavioral still sort of top the list in terms of how organizations are using to target learning and development. But again, we're continuing to see a rise in organizations using data to help them make decisions at various points in the life cycle, and really helping organizations make better decisions. But I think, as important as it is for organizations to get information to help them drive better decision making, one of the trends we're really seeing emerge is, that third item on our agenda that we talked about, what's in it for me? And I think there's sort of two layers of what's in it for me that we'd see. One is for the individual. I think, one thing that organizations have said when it comes to change management around the use of assessments, if you haven't used them before, is, some people have a perception of assessment as sort of something punitive, or that's a test. They're going to be graded, and things like that. And I think it's really important to help individuals understand that it really is about not only the organization being able to make better decisions, but their own awareness, their ability to understand their personality or their behaviors or their skills, and how they may be able to apply development or be able to utilize those skills and capabilities for job roles they maybe hadn't thought of. So it's also really about helping individuals understand what's in it for them, and making sure that there's a clear picture on both sides of how useful assessments can be, and also for managers, helping them understand how it can help them. I think when there's resistance, whenever I talk to organizations that have successfully implemented an assessment strategy, one of the stories that comes out is there's always a story of some manager who completely objected to the use of assessment. They said, I know people, I know how to make decisions, I don't need this assessment data. And time and again, they'll have a situation where someone went through an assessment and the manager said, I don't believe what the assessment is. I know this is unslated. And so I think it's also helping managers understand that it's about helping them make better decisions so that they can achieve, their individual and their team roles. So I think we've seen that be really important. And when it comes to candidates, there's a number of elements that organizations found were important. The length of time it takes to complete, making sure that the candidate experience is one that's going to be meaningful, but also easy enough that people don't drop out of it. So making sure that candidate experience is something that is really doable for the candidate. Online, again, making it convenient, not only for the survey taker or for the assessment taker, but also for you getting that information into the back end from a technology point of view. One interesting trend we've seen is providing feedback to the candidate, which is a very interesting area. Obviously, if you don't end up hiring the individual, there can be some, there's legal things to consider when it comes to giving any feedback. But we're seeing this interesting trend of, assessments becoming part of the candidate engagement process. So, being able to help a candidate, even if they weren't they weren't offered a job with the organization, helping them still see some benefit from participating in the assessment by, pointing them to resources that may help them and things like that. So I think there's some interesting things happening there with some of the solution providers to watch in terms of how assessments can be part of that ongoing candidate relationship process. And then obviously being able to integrate with other recruitment so that it's, again, an easy, seamless experience for that candidate. They don't have to go to another system and things like that, being able to integrate. If you're using an assessment in the application process, for example, being able to integrate with that easily. And I think it's also really important to think about, even post-hire, we talk about influencers of engagement, the what's in it for me, being able to help managers, engage their employees by giving them support, helping them develop skills and competencies, developing that learning culture. A lot of organizations are looking to assessments to provide guidance for the manager based on what they learn about an individual to help make sure that they can support them in meaningful ways, to help a manager have a conversation around skill or competency development with an individual and provide them with opportunities to engage and retain their team, creating that culture of learning. So I think it's also important to think about not only getting a result from an assessment, but helping guide managers and individuals to have more meaningful conversations that can help you engage and retain those individuals as well. So the next topic I wanted to talk about was integration, and I'm going back to this this picture that we looked at before, because again, it really is about how do you make assessments part of the language of your organization, especially when you start to get into some of like the personality and behavioral insights. I've been through a number of assessment batteries myself, and I always learn something. There's always takeaways where something that I sort of may have known about how I react or interact with people, it helps me articulate it. I remember one particular assessment that I took with a team. I realized that the reason, another person on the team and I sometimes were in conflict is they really liked, they felt conflict was productive and I felt it wasn't, and so we sort of had this tension between us that we hadn't been able to articulate. Once we understood, oh, he said to me, oh, you think we're having a fight and I think we're having a conversation, and it was, so that self-awareness allowed us to, take our relationship to a new level. So again, helping, assessments become part of the language of how you talk about talent, whether it's from a recruiting perspective or within a team. You're providing those insights to really let you understand what you mean when you talk about top performers. How does that break down in terms of skills and capabilities and behaviors? So it's really important to integrate assessments into your holistic thinking about the entire talent life cycle. And again, just to reiterate the point about competencies again, whether you call them competencies or not, it really is important to have a language about talent, because if you don't have a defined competency model, if you don't have a defined language by which to define what high performance looks like, it becomes very difficult to have anything to assess against. So being able to understand, what are those skills and capabilities and behaviors that really align to top performance within your organization is critically important, because that gives you the baseline for which, against which you can assess. If you don't understand, if you can't break down what top performance really, the component parts of that, it can be very hard to use an assessment to find or develop more of that within an organization or an individual. And also it's important to think about how you use the assessment output. You have to be able to take action. And so we looked at organizations and some of the ways that they use assessments. We looked at organizations that are using them in, consistently or on an ad hoc basis or not at all. And some of the most common things that organizations are using when it comes to assessment output, one is interview guides. And I think this is really helpful because, as hiring managers, we have, a lot of us have day jobs, where our whole life isn't necessarily about interviewing and recruiting. And so to be able to provide a hiring manager with guidance, not only, this person had a particular score or a particular, profile from an assessment, but being able to say, based on this, here's some areas where you may want to go deeper. Here's some areas where there may be, questionable fit when it comes to the typical high performer, so you may want to probe a little bit more. Being able to really help a hiring manager make better decisions, not just on a score that says yes or no, that's really not how assessments should be used, but really allowing them to dig deeper and get more insight and guide their decision-making process. We're seeing organizations use them to identify high potential talent, deciding which applicants move into the interview process. Again, assessments can be used throughout the talent lifecycle, but even within the hiring process, some people use them early in the process to help screen people that may be best fit. Some people use them more in-depth assessments later in the process as the final step. So again, depending on where in the talent pipeline you want to use them, there's different assessments that may be appropriate. You may be have certain skills that are required, so you want to put an assessment early in the process to look at that. When you get towards the end, you may just want to understand some of the motivators and some of the behavioral traits that are aligned to success within the organization. So understanding that there's different purposes behind different assessments. And again, throughout the life cycle for learning and development, for succession, for career planning, I think that's really interesting. That sort of gets to the what's in it for me as well, helping an individual see where they might have skill or capability or competency gaps between where they are and where they want to go in their career, and helping them find opportunities to develop and close those gaps as well.
Yeah, I was going to say that this is looking at the organizational side of it, and a couple slides back you talked about how managers can kind of use this for engagement purposes, and that seemed kind of open-ended, but these are specific tools, specific ways they can actually incorporate that into those discussions with their staff to really drive that engagement on an individual level, helping someone with their career planning or their learning and development activities. Those are specific ways to really tie that in and make it stick.
Yeah, and I think it's also true, not every manager is equally endowed with the ability to intuitively understand what a person needs when it comes to how they communicate or how they absorb information or how they may, be able to best learn. And so I think it's really helpful when managers and individuals can understand how assessments can help them, communicate better, help them have conversations about development more meaningfully. And to your point, it's really about making it actionable, helping people understand, hey, as a manager, I'm like this, and the people on my team consume information in a different way. How can I modulate how I interact with them as a manager? So again, sort of bringing that self-awareness and bringing the language about who we are and how we interact and the skills and capabilities we have to be able to maybe be more productive and create better results for individuals and for teams. And again, just when it comes to integrating, making sure that when it comes to the most valuable outputs of pre-hire assessments, potential for the job is really what organizations are looking for, even above skill. So when it comes to understanding who they want, sometimes skills can be taught, but understanding someone who has the potential to really be successful in the job. Work style or personality insights to understand, that can be really important when it comes to onboarding as well. If you know coming in that someone has a particular, maybe an area where you want to start developing right away, or if you have insights into how they best learn or absorb information, being able to tailor their onboarding to the way that's going to be most meaningful for them. We're really seeing organizations, again, integrate across the talent life cycle. It's not just you sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You learn all this information about someone during the hiring process and don't bring that into the post-hire. Really, organizations are trying to use technology and use these solutions to make sure that that information sort of follows that individual throughout their relationships within the organization as well. This also is a look at organizations that have above average reduction in turnover, so are doing a better job at reducing turnover than all others, and some of the differences between them. Particularly if you look towards the middle of the slide, managers value the insights provided, HR and business leaders collaborate on the assessment strategy, managers understand how assessments should be used. We're seeing organizations that are having better results when it comes to reducing turnover are really making sure they have that alignment with the business. That managers and hiring managers are in conversation with the business, with HR, to make sure that they're assessment strategy is really going after the things that are important to the business and that are important to driving business results. And I think it's important to remember, these conversations are not one and done. I sort of use the spaghetti plot if you've ever lived anywhere in the hurricane region, which I think both Ben and I do. The spaghetti plots for these storms, you have to check back regularly because there's lots of there's lots of ways your business may be going, and so it's important to make sure that it's not a once and done. You don't establish an assessment strategy and then forget about it. It really is making sure that it's constantly being updated as your business strategy changes, as your priorities change, making sure that your assessment strategy keeps up. If you start to shift the capabilities of a particular role, if you start to shift the span of control of a particular role, making sure that you're continuing to tweak your assessment in accordance, or even if external market conditions change. When the economy was really down, organizations, sort of changed the parameters they were looking for in their assessments because there was a different pool of talent available. As the talent market tightened up, organizations again may be sort of tweaking the parameters, tweaking their assessment strategy because again, based on the talent pool available to them, you need to be able to have different criteria to be able to make decisions in the environment you're operating in. So again, making sure that you're constantly tweaking and aligning that strategy to make sure it's truly aligned with the business. And so the last thing I want to talk about, given all of these different aspects, the fact that organizations are, looking for more data to help drive decisions, they're looking to integrate assessments throughout the talent life cycle, making sure there's alignment. It comes down to finding partners that can help support that as well. Some organizations may develop assessments in-house, but a lot of organizations partner with solution providers to help do this. And so it's really important because assessments are so much about delivering the talent that you need to execute for your customers and really help differentiate you in the marketplace through your talent. It's important to have real conversations with your providers and make sure that the tools you're using are in alignment with your goals. So there's two questions that it sort of boils down to for me is, what's it like? What's the experience both for survey takers, for managers, and also for you as HR that are interacting with solution providers? What's the support like? Do you have the ability to get what you need? If you need customization, do you have a partner that's going to help you do that? You're really understanding what's it like to be in relationship with that provider. Does it drive action? Is it beyond just saying, I sort of use the joke, it only matters if I'm a purple triangle, if we know purple triangles drive more revenue. So do we have the ability to understand, does it drive action? Does it provide tools for managers to make better hiring decisions or have better development conversations, or even just improve team dynamics overall? So does your solution help you drive action? And is it valid? And by valid, I don't just mean the validity in terms of, compliance and having the sort of the legal validity behind it, but also is it valid in terms of deriving results for your organization? So it's important to understand, are we able to tie this assessment result to ongoing performance? Have we really validated that the criteria we're using to try and guide decision making and make recommendations, is it really connected to what's driving business results? So it's important to think about all these things. And when it comes to what it's like and being in a relationship with a provider, the most important selection criteria we saw, having that valid and reliable science, really neck and neck with that quality of customer service and support. So it's table stakes to make sure there's valid and reliable science behind the assessment, but that relationship is so important as well. Your talent is so critical to your ability to execute. It's really important to make sure that you have that support when it comes to a partner. Turnaround time, again, particularly when you're talking about the hiring process, making sure that, again, from a candidate experience point of view, if you have a great candidate and they've gotten to a point where there's an assessment later in the process, you don't want to risk losing them because you have to wait for an assessment to come back. So really being able to limit that turnaround time. Again, that candidate or employee experience, make it meaningful. And all these things are coming even before price. So it's not just a price commodity conversation. It really is becoming a value conversation for organizations when it comes to making assessment decisions.
One thing that I thought was interesting looking at the results here is in the past, when I was using these kind of tools as pre-hire assessments for people to join an executive team, the key thing for me was more about the candidate experience, turnaround time. Those were kind of linked together because it was really important to to not keep them waiting, to really make sure that we didn't drag down the hiring process. Yeah. And I didn't spend a lot of time looking at the actual validity, the science behind the assessment, because I just kind of assumed if I pick one, it's going to work for what I need it to. And now, thinking back, looking at kind of the results, how some of them actually did in the job, it's kind of interesting to see that maybe I picked some that at the time might not have been valid assessments. So I think that's really important that that's number one there, and there's a reason for it being there.
Yeah, and often even if a tool measures what it's valid in terms of it measures what it says it's going to measure, it may not be the right tool in terms of predicting performance for your organization, right? So it may be measuring something and it's dead on accurate in measuring that, but that's not actually what you need as part of your decision criteria. So again, it's about not just understanding that it's that it's going designed, that it actually executes on what it's designed to do, but that that's meaningful for your organization in the context of your business goals.
That's one of the funny things that I tell people about Google. Everyone knows that they used to ask questions like how many manhole covers in San Diego or how many taxis in New York as a way to kind of get at what people's creative thinking abilities were. And then they realized eventually, you know what, all that really measures is people's ability to answer questions that are kind of brain teasers. They don't really link to actual performance on the job. They looked at the data of the actual employees and how they performed versus how they answered those kind of interview questions, and there was no link there. So they had to move towards more content valid and other validity or other valid types of assessments and questions in their pre-hire process, because they found out those were not really giving them the results they felt they were.
Yeah, and again, it's important to remember, any assessment should be a voice in the conversation, right? It's not about, assessments don't make decisions for you. They're really there to provide some of that context that we talked about earlier to be able to make better decisions. And we see that as well when we compare, again, this is comparing organizations with below average reduction in turnover versus above. So, in green, these organizations that are doing a better job at reducing turnover, they're more likely to, again, have that collaboration on the strategy, understanding the value. But also, again, if you look to the far right, they can link those pre-hire assessments to ongoing employee performance. So sort of getting to your point, it's not just that, we assess people and we're done with it. We really are linking that back to ongoing performance, and we're able to continue to tweak and validate that we actually are, getting the impact we're hoping to get from our assessment strategy, and are able to, really understand if we need to make a tweak or things like that, being able to make sure that we are actually measuring the return on investment. It's actually a shocking number of organizations that said they, actually it's on the next slide, if you look here to the right, that they don't even try to measure return on investment for their assessments, which is a little surprising given the time and energy that organizations may be investing in their assessment strategy. But we do see the most important thing people are looking for is quality of hire, which does tie back to sort of the roots of assessments. Organizations looking to pre-hire, so they're really looking to improve that quality of hire. And again, also improving employee turnover, engagement, overall organizational performance, and individual goal attainment. But I think, again, really interesting that over a quarter of organizations don't even measure the impact. So I think, again, if you're really going to get the most bang for your buck, making sure that you are tying it back to ongoing performance, as well as really making sure that it is impacting the right dials, if you will, for your organization. And I think it's also important when you think about improving quality of hire. I was having a couple conversations recently about, do recruiters like assessments? And I think it's really interesting because when you have recruiters that are sort of metriced and measured by quality of hire versus a number of people who may have accepted a job or something like that, I think there's going to be some interesting conversations within organizations around, how do you measure your talent acquisition processes in the context of assessments as well and quality of hire. So where do you draw that line between, are assessments a good thing for improving quality of hire? They may be, but do you have the right metrics when it comes to some of your talent acquisition and recruiting efforts? If they're more based on volume or getting people in the door, you may view assessments as hindering, achieving that metric. It could be a case of the unintended consequences of a metric like getting people in the door versus a quality of hire metric. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see some of those dynamics within organizations as well.
I have a question for you, Molly.
Sure.
Here, since we're talking about it, the most important here is improving the quality of hire. So, before they even start, we're trying to assess, and we think that's the most important time to do that. Why do you think that overall is more important than trying to tweak someone once they're in the door? Do you think the the return is going to be better by picking the best person up front, and there's just not as much return. There's diminishing returns of trying to tweak, and assess after they're already in the organization. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's sort of twofold. One is it may not be more important, but it's used more widely, I think, in some ways. Some people may not have rated post-hire as more important simply because they still are thinking of assessments as more of a pre-hire. They may not be using them as much post-hire. But I also think there is something to be said for the inflection point of bringing someone into the organization is a really critical point, because if you get that right, if you get the right person in the door that's going to be with you for a long time, that's going to be a top performer, that not only has the skills to execute the job today, but has the capability and the personality and behaviors to be successful in other roles into the future, that's a really critical inflection point, as opposed to someone who you bring inside and then try and figure out if they might be capable of developing or being a high performer. So I do think it's really important, sort of the Jim Collins right people on the bus theory is, if you really understand where you're going as an organization and can break down that business strategy into a talent strategy and really understand what are the skills and capabilities required to execute what we're going after, being able to utilize tools to get those right people in the door that are going to be successful today and into the future, I think really is a critical inflection point. That's not to say it's not important to use assessments post-hire, for teaming, for development, things like that, but I think being able to make better data-driven decisions, making assessments part of that conversation to get those right people in, improve that quality of hire, not only in the near term but the long term, I think is a really important use that people are seeing for assessments. And again, I think it's also the engagement and turnover as the next two metrics are really related to that, because if you get the right people in the door, you're going to reduce turnover and you're going to have higher levels of engagement, because there's a match between the individual's behaviors and traits and the requirements of job success. So again, that's one of the things that breeds engagement, is someone who is able to utilize their skills and capabilities in an environment where they can really thrive. So I'm just going to leave you with one more data slide before I turn over to Ben to talk to you a little bit about the member center research and get to any other questions we may have. But this is looking at the performance of organizations that are not using assessments versus those that are using assessments pre or post-hire. Actually, that shouldn't have an and there. It should be just pre or post-hire. And those that are using assessments throughout the life cycle, both in pre and post-hire. So you can see here when it comes to turnover, quality of hire, and change in customer retention, organizations using assessments both the pre and post-hire outperform those using them in only one of the two, either only in pre or post-hire, and especially versus organizations not using assessments. So we really, you can really see that using assessments, only one phase of the talent life cycle can be useful, but really having that integrated strategy is helping organizations hit some of those key metrics around reducing turnover, improving quality of hire, and improving customer retention as well. So hopefully we've given you some food for thought to think about the impact of assessments. How do you understand how to integrate assessments into your overall talent strategy, some of the conversations you can have with solution providers and partners, and really hopefully we've opened some eyes to the importance of assessments in helping you, again, make decisions. They don't make decisions for you. They don't solve all the problems of the world, but they really can help provide you with some insight when used appropriately for the right decisions, and when people really understand how they should be used, can really help your organization achieve some pretty dramatic results. Whenever I talk to organizations that have a successful assessment strategy, not only do you hear that story of the hiring manager who sort of is surprised by the results, but you also hear stories about organizations that really have turned up the notch on their ability to get great talent in the door and retain that talent. Sort of seeing is believing for a lot of organizations, and once they see the results, really become avid fans of assessments because they can help guide those decisions. Again, it doesn't make them for you, but really can help you, narrow down the field and make sure you're developing the right skills and capabilities that are aligned to success. So with that, Ben, I think I'll turn over to you before we go into questions, just to talk a little bit about where you can access this data if you're members of Brandon Hall. You can access the data yourself as well.
All right, so one of the tools that we provide for members at Brandon Hall Group is Data Now. It is a proprietary system. It gives access to all of our data from our research. Shortly after the survey closes, all the things that Molly has talked about today in terms of data and research, all that's loaded actually directly into Data Now, and our members can actually look at that, analyze it, cut it by company size and some other factors, and you get really nice, lovely, colorful charts just like this one here that really help you look at what's going on. And we write papers, we create white papers and research and graphics and things to try to communicate what we think is the most pertinent and most interesting, but maybe some of the things that a company is interested in we don't quite cover in something that we've created and shared out. So this gives them the opportunity to actually go in, look at those individual pieces of data, individual areas that are most important to them, and get right into that. And you know what, we're always available. The analyst team's always here if someone has a question about how that might apply to them or what they can do to change where they are. All right. Next. All right, and one other thing I want to touch on really quick. Our Member Center, again, for our members, anyone that's a member of the Brandon Hall Group, and we actually have a free trial available if you wants to check that out. Just shoot us an email and we can get you set up. But this is where we actually publish all the aforementioned research. We get these things out there, whether it's white papers, knowledge points, graphics, case studies, other reports, all these things so that our members can understand kind of the key pieces of what we're doing and what we're researching. And they can understand whether it's talent acquisition, talent management, succession, leadership, assessments, kind of the full gamut, workforce. Molly, I don't want to leave you out. Workforce, HR, those topics as well. We cover all those things in our research.
And I'll just add to that, if you are a member, we just today published a knowledge graphic, which is our version of an infographic on assessments with some of the key findings. So that's available in the Member Center right now. And it's been mentioned, all the assessment data behind the findings we shared today is in Data Now, so you can go ahead and play with that for yourself. If you're interested in the assessment topics, that's all available to you in Data Now and into the Member Center right now. So that will go. I don't know if we have any questions that have come in, Ben, but we have a little bit of time left.
We do. All right. So Christopher asks, how much do companies spend on assessment programs annually?
So, of course, I have the data in my data, but I don't have it in my head. So I can get back to you on that. But I will tell you when it comes to the spread of the budget, we see about 58 to 42 pre-hire to post-hire. So the overall budget, it still is leaning a little bit more towards pre-hire than post-hire. But unfortunately, I do not have that number at my fingertips, but I'll definitely get it back to you on that.
Okay. All right. Pamela wants to know, how do you encourage senior executives to embrace assessments for development and engagement purposes?
Yeah, that can be a challenge. I think a lot of it comes down to showing them an example. So if you don't have the luxury of an senior executive sponsor that's really bought into assessments already, start small. Start with a population that has a particular pain point. Maybe you have high turnover in a particular area. Maybe you have a lack of pipeline, of leadership pipeline or succession pipeline for a key role in a particular area. Start with a particular pain point for that the executive team is aware of, and start using an assessment solution or assessment strategy, just for that one area until you start to see some results and really build on that. Sometimes the proof is in the pudding for them if you're able to start to look at the longitudinal data and say, look, we assessed all these people for high potential or for the ability to transition into this role, people who were recommended using the assessment criteria versus those that weren't. When you start to be able to draw the comparisons and look at the results that the assessment is yielding in one small area, you can start to build on that for other areas. So I would start with if it's about adoption for succession or for development, start with a critical role or a critical pain point that you have within the organization and see if you can get some improvement through the use of an assessment tool to help you in that process and build from there.
Okay. I was going to also say I will look and see if we have a case study of a company that's done that fairly well. And when we send out these slides for the webinar, the link to the recording, I will get that. I'll try to get that case study included in that email so that you guys can see that and see how another company's done that successfully.
Great.
All right.
Just another minute or two.
Yes. What can be considered an acceptable assessment length so the employees don't get discouraged from taking it?
So that's like asking how long is a piece of string, but I'll give it my best shot. And it varies. It varies depending on the level of the job. It depends varying on what point in the process it comes. I would say, generally speaking, the earlier it is in the process, the shorter the better, because you tend to be trying to use it as a filter. So you want to have people who take it and give you enough information to be able to help filter people out. But sometimes, sometimes we see some counterintuitive results. I was talking with someone at a solution provider the other day, and they were talking about the fact that some of their clients found that actually the longer assessment helped actually filter out people who would not be a good fit anyway, because it actually got more in depth, and when it got to the point where someone realized that they weren't a good fit, they were opting out of the process. So I think a little bit of it is you have to work with with your team to understand what the goal is of the assessment, but really the optimal length of assessment is the length that gives you enough information to be able to base a decision, but that also is not not opting out the wrong people, if you will. That's going to be tolerable. That the people you're going after are going to be able to take it, but it gives you long enough the information, but short enough that it doesn't start to diminish your returns. So I know that's a pretty vague answer, but there can be a lot of variability depending on when what the role type is and when you're using it in the process.
All right. That was our last question, and we are actually out of time now, Molly.
Okay. Well, we'll just thank everyone then for their time. If you have any questions about our research, you can reach us always at success@brandonhall.com. You can find Ben and I on Twitter, so you feel free to reach out to us directly. You can find the recording of this event under our website under webinars, as well as other upcoming events. And our next research spotlight is coming up on February 25th, misconceptions in social talent acquisition. So we'll hope to see you there. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.